Thank you so much, Eugenio. So now let me invite Joe Glauber. As I mentioned before, Joe is a senior research fellow at the International Food Policy Research Institute, IFPRI, and where he works in areas of interest of price volatility, global grain reserves, crop insurance, and trade. And prior to joining IFPRI, Joe was the chief economist for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in the U.S. So welcome, Joe.
Well, thanks very much. I don't have any slides, so that's a break for you. First of all, let me say, oh, this is great. I like this. I want one of these for my office. First, let me just say, I've known Eugenio for a long time. I think he and I were first started working on together when we were representing each other's governments, or representing our governments. I wasn't representing Argentina at the time, but on an oilseed dispute in the old GATT. And since that time, I've worked with him on other projects and certainly followed his thing. And I was delighted for me to be able to work with him again here at IFPRI. And I think anyone who knows him knows how thoughtful he is and insightful and a great mentor. And so I'm very happy and honored to be asked to give a few comments here. As you'll see in this book, when you get a chance to go through it, he just, and as the takeaway from the presentation is just how complicated these relationships are in the macroeconomy and agriculture. And I look at, say, something as simple as an exchange rate issue. And certainly if you look at the value of the dollar, strengthening over the last however months, and one of the things that people talk a lot about, Maximo and I were just at a meeting last week with a bunch of other ag officials, and everyone was talking about the value of the dollar and what that has meant for soybean. And so if you look at declining prices like soybeans, they've fallen about 21% or so over the last year. And yet soybean prices are denominated largely in US dollars. So certainly American producers have seen that fall, and that probably will influence planning decisions and a whole host of other things. If you look at what's going on in Brazil, on the other hand, where the real is devalued by about 40% over the same period versus the dollar, you actually see soybean prices there rising by about 21%. And so you think, well, these have obvious implications for competitiveness and for importers like China, who are looking to buy from both the U.S. and Brazil. But of course, the exchange rates cuts both ways. And so when you look at things like fertilizer, and Brazil's a very large importer of fertilizer, for them, they've been looking at about a 30% increase in fertilizer prices, while American counterparts have been seeing a decline over the last several months. And then, of course, what's behind the exchange rate devaluation, which gets into the more complexities of the macroeconomic relationships, you have a whole host of issues. So you have a economy that's in a fairly big recession right now in Brazil. You have high interest rates. You have credit issues. So a whole host of things. So just focusing on one aspect, that is the exchange rate and what that means for maybe output prices, misses a lot of the bigger picture. The other thing, of course, has been, and something that I've had to grapple with a lot in my previous job and in this one, and the work that we do here, is looking at that relationship between agriculture and the macroeconomy. In the developed countries where agriculture may account for only 1% or less of GDP, I look at the health of the ag sector and think that, it's far more the case that how agricultural farm households in the US, for example, are much more dependent on the rural economy than the rural economy is on agriculture. I mean, agriculture obviously is very important to the rural economy, but if you look at say, the recession back in 2008, 2009, what was going on at the local plant that produced car handles for the Ford plant may have had as important impact or more important impact on farm household income than the price of corn. And so those are all, again, complicated relationships. When you go to developing countries, of course, where agriculture accounts for such a far larger share of the national GDP and far larger share of labor and exports, then that has very different impacts. For example, during the 2007, 2008 price spike, I think the focus of a lot of us was on what does this mean for urban consumers in developing countries where they are highly dependent on, say, wheat in their diet. They're highly dependent on imported wheat. And that's all, of course, very germane and indeed was a large concern during that price spike and then the similar ones in 2010-11. But I think the other thing is, and this is something Will Martin and some of his former colleagues at World Bank pointed out, is that high prices like that are also very, very important for farm income, agricultural income, and the increase of those prices in those economies, yes, ended up in increasing food prices, but for a lot of these agricultural households, it actually was able to bring them out of extreme poverty because of the income impacts. I don't have much time, and I'll more or less close. I mean, we know that there's been very strong relationships over the last 10 years or so developed between energy and agricultural prices, both in terms of agriculture being a very big consumer of energy, and also the fact that now with biofuels and other things, you have a much stronger link. And certainly, if anyone looks at any of these commodity prices over the last 10 years, you're struck with what strong co-movements you've seen. And I think that it just says that these are understanding these relationships is very important, because at the end, and I think Eugenio does a very nice job of this in the book, talking about the potential, or trying to understand what the policy choices are and how to best address them, and the fact that addressing one problem, if you're not careful addressing one problem, say, agricultural productivity, without taking into account the potential ramifications of that in other areas, like excess labor and other things, that it can lead to problems. And I think that he does a nice job. He's talked a little about the Tinbergen rule and the Bhagwati principle, but I think those are for policymakers, I think, very, very good and to remind everyone of. And let me just, at the end, just compliment him on the publication of the book. I think it exemplifies a lot of the broad breadth of your experience, your clear thinking and analysis that I think a lot of us have come to appreciate. And in any event, I think this is, I'm pleased to see this book out, and the best to you. Congratulations.